Welcome to the Business Purpose Trends podcast. I'm Phil Preston, and this is episode 9 of your weekly update. Last week, we looked at banks behaving badly and got into a bit of the Wells Fargo issue with its customer cross-sell strategy and what went wrong with that. And it does remind us that the range of issues companies are dealing with is quite vast. And one of my listeners, Jackie Lane, pointed out on LinkedIn that across all of the issues a company faces, what matters to me may not matter to you. So it's going to be pretty hard to satisfy everyone all of the time. And no company can really align with everything that everyone wants. It's also a reminder that managing ESG risks is not the same as heading towards or delivering your purpose. And you can refer to episode 6 if you want to unpack that more. Purpose is the benefit to society that the business is aiming to deliver in a financially sustainable way. So that's really focused around one or two key things, whereas ESG is like a checklist for being responsible. It's a whole lot of factors that a company or business would be wanting to check off on to make sure it's being responsible and therefore lowering the risk of what it does in its business. So this also prompts the question about business perfection. Is there such thing as a perfect company? Can any company deliver its purpose perfectly and comply with every ESG issue that's out there? Maybe some of you will be thinking of companies like Patagonia or companies with B Corp status, for example. And even if we drill down, I think we'd probably find some issues somewhere. For example, is the ink in the pens they use sustainable? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Do we hold them accountable for customers driving to their store and creating emissions in that process? You know, we would never find, I'm sure, if we got the microscope out, we would never find any perfect company. And I doubt it will ever exist. I've even known people working for B Corps who said it was great until certain events happened, and then a lot of their standards and principles went out the window. So there are usually lots of issues to deal with in most industries. And let's just look at one interesting one, for example, Uber. We all know Uber quite well for its many services and originally being, around providing transportation or alternatives to taxis in many countries. But it does provide a really good illustration of social factor complexity, having disrupted the taxi industry here in Australia and I'm sure in many places around the world, because drivers can earn money without having to buy an expensive taxi plate. Customers report that they enjoy the service quality and the demand-based pricing structure. In theory, there are environmental benefits from greater utilization of existing transport assets, i.e. cars. But on the flip side, and I'm partly referencing here an ABC background briefing investigation by Alex Mann back in August 2018, many Australian taxi plate owners saw the value of their taxi plates plunge when Uber came into the market. And for someone who just forked out hundreds of thousands of dollars for a taxi plate, they then saw their investment severely diminished in a short space of time. This led to many cases of financial hardship and suicides, and it's matched similar experiences overseas. So critics claim that Uber had bullied its way into new markets by deliberately breaking regulations, gaining a hard-to-dislodge foothold as regulators struggled or weren't willing to level the playing field for competition. So the social trade-offs have not been great because it's cost lives, and is that okay? Can you make a case, well, there's a net gain for any so-called losses? Can you even equate the loss of a life with an improved service for a lot of people? I'm sure economists could put a dollar value on a life based on, say, economic productivity. However, this feels pretty hollow and very uncaring way of thinking about business and society. So maybe no answers there, but from a company's perspective, should it really be bothering to try and micromanage and mitigate every single issue? It's probably unrealistic. So here's a suggested course of action, and it's not just my idea, it's what some companies do well and maybe some not so well. And that is to understand the impacts on major stakeholders to the business of what they're doing. So what are the impacts on customers, surrounding communities, on staff, to investors or suppliers? We can go through each of these stakeholder groups and find out what matters to them most. And then what a lot of larger companies do is plot a chart of each issue. So they'll have an XY chart on one axis, mapping the importance to the stakeholder of a particular issue. And on the other axis, the importance to the business of that particular issue. And that then points them towards the issues that are in the top right-hand box, which will be high importance for both to stakeholders and to the business. And some companies do provide this in their annual reporting or their sustainability reporting. For a session I was facilitating recently, which was in the financial and banking industry, I put together a list of the material issues that came up from all the major banks, and I had 26 issues and we're still counting. So, for example, customer service, climate change, scams and frauds, access to banking, and so on. There's a lot of issues that come up. So I think for any business, the best response is to go through these 5 steps, and that is to have that awareness and I guess realization that you're not perfect. Have recognition of what the material and the major issues are, because they're the ones worth focusing on, the things that are important to you and your stakeholders. Thirdly, a commitment to actually do something and create a plan to mitigate or address those bigger issues. Fourthly, humility in communications. So a willingness to say where you're at and what you need to do from here and what you intend to do, and don't try and pretend you're going to solve everything in 10 seconds flat. As we saw last week with Wells Fargo, they were pumping out communication saying everything was okay when it wasn't. And fifthly, action. Actually do it. Move to close that gap, but refine and review along the way. Now, that's probably a fairly standard formula for any type of, I guess, serious change management, but it's worth keeping in mind, I think, for just locking onto the issues that are important and addressing them. So circling back to Jackie's observation, there's nothing perfect about our lives or the world we live in, nor the companies we work for or with or buy products from. I don't think that's a realistic expectation, but let's focus on what the key issues are and move towards them and focus on them, because they're the things that will have the greatest impact for the most people. So I hope this sparks some thoughts for you. And next week, we'll be hearing from someone who is very seasoned and I would say revered in the business purpose space, someone who's been working within corporates for decades now, doing some really great and leading work in this space. So stay tuned for that. I'd love you to recommend this to others in your network if you enjoyed it, and love your feedback as always. You'll find my contact details in the show notes. Thanks so much for tuning into the Business Purpose Trends podcast. I'm Phil Preston, and may the business purpose trend be with you.